Fractale, não sei se é, vamos ver. Furakutaro, tá, é Fractale. Fractale versus a indústria do anime.
Fractale is a rare kind of anime in that it's an anime where its media
Fractal,
narrative
fala assim.
is a lot more interesting than the show itself. And what do I mean by that? I mean that Fractale itself, God, you know, I mean, I wouldn't call it a particularly bad anime, but I wouldn't call it a particularly good one either. Like, I'm guessing that there's a pretty good chance that you either haven't heard of this anime at
Nunca ouvi
all,
falar.
or that this is the first time you've heard anyone so much as mention it in years. And yeah, that doesn't shock me at all. While it has a few fans out there, for the most part, this anime was met with a resounding meh upon its release. So then, if it's so unmemorable, then why am I talking about it? What do I mean when I say that this is an anime with a media narrative more interesting than the show itself? Well, I mean that while the show itself
Será
was
que é a produção que é o
largely
negócio? Que
forgettable,
interessante.
the headlines it was making were anything but. Like, if you were even
Que Fractal no Itamina, anime with Kanagas e Yamaken. Que porra é essa?
sort of following anime news in the early months of 2011, it would have been harder not to hear about Fractale at least a few times, or at the very least, jokes about how its director was gonna
The hero of the anime deserves not the one in Israel, right now, so hunting. Meu Deus.
save anime. Yeah, obviously I'll explain in
Referência ao
detail
Dark
in
Knight.
just a moment, but its director pretty much staked his career on this anime doing well because he was just so confident that it was going to revolutionize anime as we know it.
Que loucura.
That did not end up happening. That extremely did not end up happening, and it
O Igor queria fazer um mangá, né? Ele tem que tomar cuidado com isso aqui, cara.
didn't happen so hard that it
Às
even
vezes é melhor você fazer um negócio que você sabe que é divertido e é legal e você não quer revolucionar porra nenhuma do que falar, não, vou fazer um mangá aqui, não sei o que, não sei o que. Vai por mim, cara. Cauliflower Dilema tá parado até hoje. Às vezes é melhor você só fazer algo e algo que seja legal no lugar de ficar querendo fazer a melhor coisa do mundo e você não ter tanto apego que você não consegue deixar o negócio do jeito que você quer.
became a meme to use it as a metric to measure the success, or lack thereof, for other anime releases. Yeah, if this sounds
Poxa,
pretty
existe
wild,
mangá brasileiro?
it's because
Existe. Tem um que eu vi lá que o moleque tem sorte. E ele vai lá e quer apostar no tigrinho, já que ele tem sorte, o caralho. Mó legal esse mangá, eu li o começo, achei divertido. Também tem o Rei da Lata, que eu achei divertido o começo. Mas só li o começo, né? Só fui avaliar pra ver se era da hora. E é da hora, sim.
it is. Let me tell you all about it.
Falando sério, tem um mangá do tigrinho, é legal? Esse é o nome.
Our story begins in the mid and late 2000s, specifically with the success of series like Canon 2006, Lucky Star, and K-On! The aesthetic and overall vibe of these anime and others like them was generally referred to as moe. My god, there's a word I haven't heard in 50 years. And people tended to have...
O pessoal odiava Moe na época, ele é muito idiota, cara. Hoje em dia todo mundo pega o Azumanga Daioh, pelo menos na gringa, né? Porque o Brasil é meio atrasado com isso. Mas na gringa o pessoal já pega o Azumanga Daioh, essas coisas e fala: nossa, que clássico e tal. Pô, na época que tinha um monte de anime parecido e muitos bons, o nego tacava pedra, porque não tinha... Como que eu posso falar? Não tinha, tipo... Porra, não tinha ação, não tinha porrada, e nego tava acostumado com anime assim. E meio que essa popularização do moe, dos bonequinhos de anime, de bishoujo, de personagem feminino, até tinha anime, mas a quantidade era pequena, entendeu? Anime de macho, tinha. É porque a gente meio que perdeu a ascensão dos bishoujo gemo, né? Dos jogos de garota de anime, das VN. Então, tipo, muitas vezes o cara jogava por cima e não conseguia ver profundidade num negócio que muitas vezes era mais adulto até do que o anime de porrada que ele queria ver. Mais maduro, mais interessante. Sabe, Azumanga eu acho bem maduro. Azumanga é uma história bem madura. Tô nem zoando, viado. Ele não é um negócio adulto pesado, mas ele é maduro. O jeito que ele trata da nostalgia, do crescimento, né? Da pessoa crescendo, é bem maduro, né? É bem legal, cara. Mas na época o pessoal tava querendo odiar tudo de anime de garotinha que aparecesse. Mesmo que fosse bom. É o caso do Nichijou. Nichijou... Agora todo mundo ama Nichijou, né? Nichijou é bom pra caralho. É um dos melhores animes já animados. Nossa, animação e tal. Luckstar é referência na época de Moe. Era, mas aí veio o problema. Luckstar começou a ser odiado com o tempo. E agora começou a ser amado de novo. Tem um período que todo mundo odiava Luckstar.
strong opinions about it, which is...
Eu acho que ele é mais fraco desses aí que a gente tá falando. Mas eu acho que ele tem seu valor também. Ele é mais algo meta, né?
to say that for the most
Tipo, ele é meio que uma mídia otaku comentando sobre a mídia otaku, em algum nível.
part, people either loved or hated moe. Enter anime director Yutaka Yamamoto, aka Yamakon, who had been working at KyoAni up until 2007. His credits from his time there include, but aren't limited to, being an episode director for Air, Fullmetal Panic Fumofu and the Second Raid, and Canon
O Metal Panic era
2006,
brabo.
and series production director for the first season of The Melancholy of Haruhi Suzumiya.
Brabíssimo
He made
também.
his full directorial debut with Lucky Star, but after only 4 episodes, he was abruptly removed from the position because, for reasons that, as far as I can see, he's never fully clarified, he was fired. The official statement essentially stated that he just wasn't at the level that they needed him to be at, so yeah,
Como assim?
he was, as far as I can see,
Cara, tem sugestões de que perderam tempo que pode ter sido por assédio sexual.
he's never
Mas
fully
a justificativa oficial foi que ele não tava no nível. Que bizarro, viado.
clarified, he was fired. The official statement essentially stated that he just wasn't at the level that they needed him to be at, so yeah, the specifics of what happened still remain vague. But anyways, yeah, no longer with KyoAni, Yamakon founded a small new studio called Ordette, and Ordette saw decent success in its early years. You know, in
Caramba, arte
2008 they were
bonita.
credited for having done production assistance for Kanagi, which was animated by A1 but directed by Yamakon, and in 2010 they made the Black Rock Shooter.
Caralho, eles que fizeram o OVA do Black Rock Shooter. Pô, esse OVA é da hora
This time
visualmente.
that Yamakon developed
Da
some
Black Rock Shooter.
pretty difficult feelings about moe that can only generously be described as not 100% positive. More specifically, what he seemed to particularly dislike wasn't so much moe itself as it was the growing fan culture surrounding moe and its perceived fracturing of the anime community. His thoughts on the matter seem best captured in a 2009
O primeiro Igoi, ele é o primeiro Igoi que começou a odiar o Moe, cara.
interview for the Otaku Encyclopedia,
O primeiro otaku do barra A de 2012, que os otakus do barra A 2012, 2013, 2014, 2015 era essa porra de odiar Moe também. E na época ninguém valorizava. Eu não valorizava, eu tava no meio, eu odiava Moe junto. Só que aí, tipo, eu fui crescendo, eu fui perdendo o preconceito, fui vendo um anime ou outro que tinha elementos de Moe, né? Tipo, personagem bichoujo mais ser fofo e tal, tipo, Bot The Rock. Eu descobri que o negócio é perfeito. O negócio faz sentido. É uma estética que faz sentido quando ela faz, né? Não tô falando que, tipo, você tem que amar a estética por si só. Não, você gosta do que você quiser, não foda-se. Mas tô dizendo que tem lugares que ela se encaixa melhor. Digamos que ela se encaixa muito bem em algo como Air, em algo como Clannad, em algo como Bot, em algo como... Siri eu não diria que é Moe exatamente, mas Siri barra, sabe, Azumanga barra... Eu não consigo ver esses animes como Moe, apesar deles serem um pouco, mas encaixa, é uma estética, é um estilo, e pode fazer sentido em certas narrativas.
which is apparently a book that exists. But anyways, in this 2009 interview, he said about moe,
I say I make moe anime because it's
O Alexandre
convenient.
aparentemente odeia Moe. Cara, eu não sei por que ele odeia Moe. Será que ele odeia Moe mais pra um viés de alguém que, tipo, vê anime de modo mais despretensioso e aí, tipo, não tem muita conexão com a cultura do nicho pra, tipo, conseguir, sei lá, tolerar essas coisas, barra ver como só mais uma forma de linguagem? Porque é só mais uma forma de linguagem estética, no final. Ou será que é porque ele pegou essa cultura do 2015 meio atrasado? Também tem isso, né? Muita gente pegou essa cultura do eu odeio Moe lá, porque, porra, no 4chan era isso, né? 2014, 2015, 2013, esses memes. E tem muita gente que vem desde essa época, 2017, 2018, metendo esse papo. Eu não sei se isso que influenciou o Alexandre também. Eu não tenho nada contra, nada a favor de Moe. Eu acho que é uma linguagem visual que pode ser boa, pode ser uma merda. Alexandre amargurado com a indústria vê dos 283 Moe ruim por temporada. Não é pra tanto, ele vê uns anime normal, cara. Vê uns anime normais, vê uns anime legal, uns anime merda. Mas também se você ficar acompanhando todos os animes formulaico, tudo é uma bosta. Tudo que é... O problema é algo ser formulaico, essa que é a verdade. Isekai, inerentemente, é um conceito muito legal, cara. Parece divertido quando você fala. Mas aí você vai ver o negócio, tem 30 Isekai igual, é tudo uma merda, sabe? Agora, o ruim é algo ser formulaico. É isso que eu penso. Provavelmente segunda opção, de qualquer coisa bonitinha. O problema é isso, né? Bot The Rock, a estética combina totalmente. A direção de arte é ótima. É ruim porque é uma... Não sei, cara. Ele gostou de Bot em TV. Então nada tá na pedra, né? Nada tá na pedra. O O Alexandre gosta do que ele quiser, isso que eu penso. Que ele gostar, ele gosta. Que não quiser, não gostar, não gosta. Eu só não gosto quando é influência da Hive Mind, né? Porra, não, é por causa desde 2015, é a cultura anti-moe do barra A, porque tem um choque cultural da cultura bichoujo nunca ter sido exportado. Eu acho isso meio... eu fico feliz que na gringa morreu. Na gringa agora ninguém mete esse papo mais. Na gringa, o top... Tipo, atualmente os caras são tipo assim... Tem a galera que é chato, que fica chamando todo anime de Jiri, mas mesmo essa galera tem um consenso que, tipo, meio que você pode ver um bot, gostar do bot porque é divertido. Não por causa de fanservice. Tem a cultura de, tipo, estigmatizar fanservice e puritanismo, mas a cultura de odiar a moe não, tanto que Azumanga ficou bem mainstream, né?
But I have no
Mesmo não sendo moe,
idea
mas,
what
tipo, um anime entre aspas, moe.
moe is. I can't deny that some characters are moe, but if we try and define those elements, we end up creating separate camps of fans that cut themselves off from one another. I'm not criticizing moe anime, and it's fine if moe elements are there, but making it on purpose and categorizing it isn't good. Anime as anime is just fine, so we should leave it that way.
Yeah, and in case any of that's a little too subtle for you,
Ah, não, mas essa entrevista não diz muito, não.
here's something else he said later in the same interview.
Ah, agora
As
você
a
vai falar
creator,
bagulho.
I have a responsibility to change anime. We need to stop categorizing, suppress the tendency to cut ourselves off from others in the community, and liberate anime and bring it to the masses. If we don't,
Esse cara, ele cometeu um erro. Pior coisa quando chegou nas massas, cara. Se fosse um bagulho de nicho até hoje. Apesar de que eu não ganharia dinheiro com isso. Então, obrigado por... Eu acho que na verdade tá certo, porque aí eu não ganharia dinheiro fazendo live. Mas é bom ganhar dinheiro, obrigado. Tem que realmente expandir anime, porque aí mais gente vai pro meu canal. Mas dito isso, eu acho que, tipo... Será que ele sabe o que acontece quando você expande pras outras pessoas? Aí, tipo, um negócio que é de nicho, muitas vezes é forçado a moldar por geral, no lugar de agradar o nicho. Gosto, por exemplo, de jogo de nicho que tá no nicho. Por exemplo, Dark Souls, Elden Ring, são coisas que, tipo, eles cresceram naturalmente e ficaram gigantes. Hoje em dia são gigantes, não são mais de nicho. Mas eles se mantiveram agradando só o nicho de jogadores que eles gostam. Não é tipo, ai não, quero agradar todo mundo. Elden Ring não é feito pra agradar todo mundo, claramente.
then we will
Acho que
continue
ele tinha
to
medo de rolar um crash na indústria porque tava ficando muita coisa de nicho pra nicho pra nicho.
retreat into smaller groups, watching more specialized anime until we perish.
Yeah, does that sound a little melodramatic to you? Yeah, maybe even a little unhinged? Good, it should, because it is. Years later, he would recall that K-On! Specifically gave him the chills, and that it made him realize that he lost his place in the anime industry. But he also felt like he absolutely had to return to it. Ultimately, these conflicting emotions resulted in his directing Fractale. Yeah, formally announced in August 2010, although whispers and vague news about it had been circulating for some time by that point, at first glance, Fractale seemed like an interesting project. Made by A1 and Ordet, this original sci-fi anime would be on the Noitamina block, which in case you don't know what that is, it's a Japanese programming block which has featured plenty of fantastic anime, and the main trio working on it would be Yamamoto himself, of course, prolific screenwriter Mario Okada, and Japanese culture critic and scholar Hiroki Azuma, who were going to be the director, series composer, and story developer respectively. Yeah, it was definitely the kind of announcement that people took notice of and were excited about right off the bat, sure, but also getting a lot of attention was a certain blog post on Fractale's official site, one written by Yamamoto, and in true Yamamoto fashion, yeah, it's, you know what? No, I'll just let you go ahead
É um
and hear
texto
it for yourself.
revolucionário.
The subject of anime has troubled me a great deal. It's been quite a while, in all honesty, more than a year at least. Despite that, I've still stuck in and dabbled with anime when possible. I talk about anime whenever I could, involve myself where I could. The more it came up, the more I'd think about it. And the more I thought about it, the darker my thoughts would get. It began to cloud my daily life. I'd be lying if I said I hadn't thought things like, maybe anime's just not the way to go. Many times, though I always kept it to myself. The only thing stopping me from giving up entirely was the unease, the guilty conscience eating at me alongside those thoughts. Wouldn't quitting and writing off the whole medium be unfair to the anime that's brought me to the point I'm at right now? That's the kind of thinking I've had recently. But maybe it's just a guise for my stubborn nature. I think I'm ready to go out in vain. I think I'm prepared to sacrifice myself for no real reason. That's why I'm going to try my hand at one last show. I think that this is an ultimate gamble for me, in the truest sense of the term. If this project fails, then I won't hesitate. I'm done. I'll retire. I'm mentally prepared for that. That's why I'm writing this statement. But despite that personal resignation, despite accepting it, I still want to tell you something. There's something I need to convey to you, something I can't quite put into words. It's a little thing inside of me that screams, I'm not done yet. You could probably call it
Que
faith.
loucura, mano.
I've grabbed tight to that little fragment of faith.
Que loucura,
I'm going
viado.
to use as much of it as I can to work on this anime. I don't know how things are going to turn out, but I have to hope. I can only dream of a future where anime truly shines, and I hope to be a part of it. I'll see you all when Fractale begins.
And just like that, the word was out. If Fractal failed, Yamamoto would retire. Now, I know that nowadays he's since developed a bit of a reputation for doing this sort of thing somewhat regularly, but in 2010, he had never done this before,
Essa
so
só
this
faz
was
drama todo segundo.
kind of a big deal. The ante was up, and nobody really knew if his confidence was well earned or if he was about to have a massive egg on his face. Speaking of which, yeah, so where did Yamamoto's boundless confidence for Fractal's success come from anyways? What made him so convinced that it was going to be successful that he was willing to effectively gamble his career on it? Well, in addition to the obvious things like, you know, the names attached to the series, that it would be on the Noitamina block, and the positive reception that the announcement got, I think a lot of it can be seen in an Asahi article from early January 2011, not long before Fractal actually started airing. It's a piece on Yamamoto's pessimism
Qual a
toward the
diferença que
then...
escrever em análise de japonês para análise de ocidental? Cara, eu vou te falar um negócio. O oriental, o japonês especial, né? Não sei oriental todo, que a única língua que eu li coisa é japonês. Ele liga muito pra dinâmica de personagem, ele liga muito pra conversa de personagem, trejeito de personagem. Eles gostam muito da construção do personagem, do design do personagem. Eles gostam muito do papo de personagem. Eles botam muito esforço no papo de personagem. Aqui no Ocidente a gente é muito focado em temas, mensagem, em motifs, né? A gente é muito focado em... A gente gosta de falar mecanismos narrativos, a gente gosta da história, mas a gente não fala tanto dos personagens quanto o japonês normalmente falaria. O japonês ama personagem. O japonês ama personagem. Isso é refletido até nas obras que a gente cria, né? Ocidental... E também na história, né? A gente tem uma história da hermenêutica, né? De buscar a palavra e o significado por trás dos textos, né? Porque é derivação de texto religioso, nessa lógica. Lá, eu não sei por que eles focaram tanto em personagem. Eles levam cada personagem como um tema à parte que agrega na história também. Mas eles gostam de trejeitos, de falas de personagem. O Ryukishi, ele tem um negócio que ele fala que cada trejeito de cada personagem de Higurashi foi hiper planejado, porque ele queria que você soubesse quem tá falando cada coisa sem nem indicar quem que tá falando. E funciona, realmente, né? Cada um tem seu trejeito ali. Coisa assim, eles se importam muito. Agora... mas a função narrativa e tal, eles são bons nisso, mas eles não ligam tanto pro negócio significar algo muito grande. Sword Art Online, eu acho que é um exemplo disso. Não é, porque os personagens também é meio vazio. Se eu lembrar algum anime que, tipo, eu acho que os personagens são muito bons, mas a história é efetivamente vazia. Moe, né? A maioria dos Moe é bastante isso. A maioria desses Moe mais padrão é, tipo... Os personagens, eles botam muito esforço pra deixar cada um idiosincrático e memorável, apesar de seguir arquétipos. Mas cada um tem seus trejeitos, você vai lembrar deles. Mas muitas vezes a história não é tão interessante, né? No grande esquema das coisas.
current state of the anime industry, and there's a lot to unpack in this piece.
São histórias que os personagens carregam, né? O manga mesmo, a história é interessante quando ela quer ser séria, mas no geral os personagens carregam, né?
If I sit here and dissect the whole thing, we'll be here all day. Really, I think the only thing you need to take from this article, for the sake of this video, at least, is that
Acho que anime de idol tem que fazer isso, né? Tem que fazer.
Yamamoto believed that the anime industry at the time was in a very introverted state, but that Fractale would be different because rather than try to appeal to diehard anime fans, it would instead target non-anime fans or former anime fans who've kind of fallen out of the hobby, presumably due to the rise of moe. Yeah. That was it. That was the secret ingredient. That seems to be a large part of why he believed Fractale would be so successful. Because it wouldn't bank on appealing to otaku or otaku culture. Because it would be, well, not like other anime. Yeah, do you remember that interview with the Otaku Encyclopedia that I mentioned earlier? Toward the end, he talks about an anime that he's working on that'll be out in 2010, and given how his involvement with Black Rock Shooter was pretty limited, he's just credited as a supervisor, and how he mentions that this project will have an original story, I think he's referring to Fractale here. And he says about this mystery project that's probably Fractale,
I want it to be a work that overthrows the moe anime Yamamoto Yutaka image. There will be no more dancing in my anime.
Quebrou a promessa. Quebrou a promessa, caralho. Ele quebrou a promessa. Aí vai fudeu, né?
So, yeah, you wouldn't be totally off the mark if you said that the way he talks about the anime industry, and moe especially, it really makes it sound like he wanted Fractale to be a sort of anti-moe statement, and whether or not it succeeded in being that, well, let's not get too ahead of ourselves. Instead, for now, I want to talk about the statement that
Você acabou de cair agora.
much more well-known for making,
aconteceu
at
com o
least
cara?
in the West. And that's its failed, albeit explosive, one about...
E o Bey matou o cara, mano.
Yeah, let's go ahead and fast forward a bit to the actual airing of Fractale. In 2011, official simulcasts were still a relatively new thing. The first few happened in 2008, but it wasn't until 2009 and 2010 that we started seeing them happen more regularly. The overwhelming majority of these official simulcasts were being done through Crunchyroll, but by winter 2011, Funimation had been starting to rack up a decent amount of experience too. So the news that they'd be simulcasting Fractale, which many were already highly anticipating since Yamamoto had spoken so boldly about it, wasn't necessarily a surprise, since in 2010 Funimation had signed an agreement with Fuji TV that would allow them to simulcast the Noitamina shows, but it was an announcement that was nonetheless met with quite a bit of intrigue. And yet, it was not nearly as much intrigue as the update that everyone received about a week later, that after only one episode, the Fractale Production Committee, aka the FPC, demanded that Funimation's simulcast be halted until Funimation did away with all the pirated streams and downloads of the first
Meu
episode
Deus.
on the internet.
Mas não tem como fazer isso.
That's clear,
Não tem como
because
fazer
I
isso.
am fully aware of
Idiota.
just how ridiculous that sounds, but against
Caralho.
all odds, that really was what was being asked of Funimation, to get rid of all the pirated versions of Fractale on the internet. All of them. As if that
Não
was
tem
a
como.
thing they could just do. As if they hadn't been struggling against piracy themselves for years. But apparently that didn't matter. Yeah, per the ANN piece on this, according to Funimation representatives, the committee requested that Funimation eliminates unauthorized videos of the anime on the internet, including streaming sites, file sharing networks, and file servers, before its simulcast will be allowed to continue. As a result, there will not be a simulcast of the second Fractale episode tomorrow, and the rest of the series' simulcast is on indefinite hold. In response to the slightly less absurd idea that the FPC might have just been referring to illegal streams and uploads of that first episode of Fractale, specifically with the Funimation subs, ANN's late executive editor Zach Birchie even further clarified in the thread about this news.
Boy, you'd think that, wouldn't you? But nope, we clarified with Funimation on this, they mean everything.
The public response to this news was more or less exactly what you'd expect. You know, a lot of confusion, a lot of disappointment, a lot of people pointing out that all this was gonna do was force people who still wanted to watch it to pirate the show, and plenty of opinions about piracy overall. Funimation's then marketing director, Lance Haskell, even chimed in briefly with a couple of posts in the ANN thread about it, and a Funimation blog post about territory rights. Nonetheless, regardless of their opinions on piracy, people were, for the most part, just thinking that the FPC was making an absurd request. And making things even more absurd was that the FPC confirmed the next day that they'd still allow the French simulcast to continue, which wasn't just hypocritical, but also still gave pirates access to high-quality rips of the episodes to use. But after a few more days of limbo and the airing of episode 2, it was announced on the 24th that Funimation could resume its simulcast, that the second episode would come out that very day, which was a Monday, and that episode 3 and all other future episodes would be out on Thursdays. Funimation issued a statement basically saying that on behalf of the FPC, they've been taking the appropriate legal action toward the online illegal distribution of Fractale, and that seemed to be that. To this very day, the specifics of what went on behind the scenes and why the
Muito
FPC
esquizofrenia,
wanted to do this
cara.
in the first place still aren't clear.
Ó,
I
Copcraft
even
ali.
tried reaching out
Esse
to
anime era
Lance
bom.
to learn more about this whole
Divertido,
thing, but
Copcraft.
alas, he seems to have completely forgotten about it. To me, personally, this whole thing sounds like a flashy but misguided effort to reduce piracy, which was made and approved by people who didn't really get how the internet worked, but this is just speculation, and the facts remain obscure. That being said, it's unclear whether or not these are connected to the FPC's request, not least of all because these don't center around Fractale, but it's still worth noting that on the same day that it was announced that the simulcast was resuming, that Funimation and an anti-piracy service sent a DMCA copyright complaint to Google over links to pirated episodes of One Piece appearing in search results. And then on the 25th, the literal day after the announcement that the Funimation simulcast was resuming, Funimation announced their plan to sue 1,337 BitTorrent users for pirating episode 481 of One Piece. Yeah, spoiler alert, ultimately, this lawsuit did not work out. Again, it's unclear as to whether or not the FPC's request had any influence over these decisions, but nonetheless, the timing of these relative to all this Fractale stuff still definitely raised the collective eyebrow of everyone who'd been keeping tabs on it. But anyways, after this all blew over, well, later there would be one more unexpected delay in Fractale's simulcast, though surprisingly, it wasn't because of the Tohoku earthquake and tsunami, which happened close to the end of Fractale's airing. No, instead the delay would end up being because of icy roads and rolling power outages in the Dallas-Fort Worth area that kept Funimation's headquarters
Nossa,
closed
que
for
má
3 days.
sorte.
Nonetheless, Fractale eventually ended in April of 2011, but just because the series itself ended doesn't mean that the drama ended with it. Do you remember what I said earlier about Yamamoto saying that he'd retire if this anime didn't do well? Yeah, let's talk about how that worked out for him. I want to take you back to that Otaku Encyclopedia interview with Yamamoto for
Tá escrito ali?
just a moment. I want to
Caralho. Almogada. Será que a ideia, né, tipo, a ideia de um novo projeto Yamamoto deixa você intrigado? Ou será que o Fractale te deixou com um gosto suficiente ruim na boca quanto deixou na minha, ao ponto de desejar que ele só tomasse a própria eu posso falar, ouvisse a sua próprio papo, sua dica, sua advice, e pare de fazer anime pra sempre. Mogou, cara. Sobra
I
nada pro
want to
Beto.
take you back to that Otaku Encyclopedia interview with Yamamoto for just a moment. In particular, I want to remind you of this little quote.
Aparentemente ele não parou não, porque depois disso que ele fez anime de dança.
As a creator, I
Como
have a
assim?
responsibility to change anime. Like we already discussed, it's hard to hear Yamamoto talk about his views of the anime industry at the time and not feel like he wanted Fractale to be a sort of anti-moe statement, and I think it's the combination of these ideas that Yamamoto seemed to feel a level of personal responsibility to change anime and his resentment toward moe's effects on the anime industry and the viewers that resulted in the spreading of the honestly not entirely far-fetched idea that Yamamoto thought Fractale was gonna save anime. Hence the meme, Yamamoto is gonna save anime. So then, did he do it? Did Yamamoto save anime? Well, you know what? Let's go ahead and take a look at Fractale's sales numbers. For most anime DVD and Blu-ray releases in the late 2000s and early 2010s, to sell over 10,000 copies in the first week of release was usually considered a signifier of an incredibly successful release, but to sell a few thousands of copies was still considered pretty respectable. The first volume of Fractale, however, which was released in Japan on April 22nd, 2011, sold an absolutely pitiful, downright
Meu Deus.
embarrassing 883
Mas depois
copies
deu uma
during its
melhorada,
release
né?
week, making it easily the worst-selling first volume of an anime from its season. It was so pitiful, in fact, that it became a bit of a meme to use it as a metric for measuring the success of other anime. But while the rest of Fractale's sales, or rather their lack thereof, wouldn't achieve meme status, they still weren't particularly better. You know, Volume 2 was the best-selling of the bunch at 888 copies, and then its sales took a sharp decline for Volumes 3 and 4, which sold 528 and 519
Nossa.
copies respectively. And while DVD and Blu-ray sales
Fracasso.
definitely aren't a definitive metric for success, I think it's safe to say that they're pretty important to take into consideration when you, oh god, I don't know, gamble your career on the show in question being successful. So then, was Yamamoto gonna follow through? Was he really gonna retire?
Oh, hell no! Hell no, hell no.
Like I mentioned earlier in the video, his effectively gambling his retirement on Fractale's success became a big talking point among anime fans pretty much right off the bat. And in fact, shortly after he made that statement, his blog was reportedly closed so he could take responsibility for making a reckless announcement of his immediate retirement, provoked by an anonymous inflammatory comment on the blog. He was harshly reprimanded by Noitamina producers Isoda and Shimizu and has withdrawn his retirement. But of course, this didn't stop people from joking around about it, and certainly not from asking about it either. Just over a week after Fractale finished up, the cover of a new issue of Otona Anime magazine said, "Finally, Yamamoto talks about Fractale." And, well, you can probably imagine how it worked out.
I thought to myself about how I'm part of this industry, so I need to at least watch some of what's being broadcast from it these days. I turn on the TV and watch whatever production happened to be on at the time, and honestly, I'd sit there, staring at it with no idea what the hell was going on. I thought to myself, have I gone nuts? Then I wondered if the world itself had just gone nuts instead. One thing was clear in either case. My values didn't line up with whatever the hell was the norm on the screen these days, and I wasn't sure how to bridge that gap. Fractale came out and it just wasn't appreciated enough for what it is, so that puts me at a total loss. I have no idea what to do going forwards. I honestly have no clue. I'm seriously thinking I should just retire for a while. I'd appreciate it if you included this. You can fly the retiring part as a headliner or something if you want. I'd rather you did that, since otherwise I don't know if I'd be able to...
Só falar que deu errado, cara.
Am I so out of touch? No, it's the children who are wrong.
So, what of the million-dollar question then? Did Yamamoto actually retire? No. No, he did not. Despite everything, he would start vague posting about a new project again as soon as November of that year, effectively cementing that he was indeed not actually retiring.
Se ele
And
ficasse
as a
fazendo
little
os
side
moe lá
note,
na
by the way,
Kyoto
you know,
Animation,
just to
nada
give
de
you a
ruim
little
teria
bit of
acontecido.
perspective on what people thought about this, I want to read you the last bit from the Crunchyroll news piece about this. It says, "Does the prospect of a new project from Yamamoto leave you intrigued? Or did Fractale leave enough of a bad taste in your mouth as it did mine to wish he had took his own advice and leave anime for good?"
É, quebrou.
So yeah, in so many words,
Pior que a arte do
the
Fractale era bonita,
legacy
hein?
of Fractale is not exactly a great one. You know, in doing the research for this video, it quickly became obvious that people who remembered anything about Fractale at all, which is already kind of a feat in and of itself, usually remembered more about the memes and weirdness surrounding Fractale than Fractale itself. Though to be honest, I think that has less to do with the anime itself as it does Yamamoto and his absolute nonsense, both at the time and in later years.
Cara. Pessoal reclamando dele. Pô,
For the most part, reviews and scores for
cara do
Fractale tend to be
Yamazaki.
pretty lukewarm. Like, as of when I'm
Yamazaki,
writing this
não, nome do
script, its average score on my anime list is 6.95,
anime okay.
on IMDb 6.9, but then on Anime News Network it's 7.4-ish, and on AniList it's nice. And as for Yamamoto, he was then and has continued to be
Yamamoto era o nome, né?
an extremely divisive figure within the anime industry, and that's wording it very, very generously. But if I sit here and fully detail what I mean when I say this, we'd be here all day. So for the sake of getting this video wrapped up, here's just a brief and, I cannot emphasize this enough, non-exhaustive highlight reel of what he's been up to since Fractale.
Pera. Meu Deus. Meu Deus. Vamos pausar. Ele pediu pra pausar. Quê? Caralho, pediu pra pausar o mangá e a autora do mangá de Fractale falou que o negócio é desinteressante. E aí depois ele falou pra um artista de mangá desenhar outra coisa, então, no lugar de ficar usando o trabalho dos outros pra ganhar relevância. Que ele falou, chamou fã de anime, que ia ver anime depois de certa idade e falou que são, tipo, retardado mental, e aí ele pediu desculpa. Aí ele quer fazer um filme chamado Crepúsculo, né? E ele vai fazer mesmo se o crowdfunding fracassar. Aí ele falou que ele prometeu que vai desbloquear os fãs do Twitter se eles doarem pro próximo filme. O blog oficial dele ficou offline. Aí ele fala que ele promete que vai sair da indústria depois de acabar o filme Crepúsculo. Pero o Yamamoto parou de... Ele brigou com o pessoal que tava fazendo o New Wake Up Girls, que é um anime que ele ajudou a fazer. O Twitter dele foi suspenso por ser abusivo, ameaçador, discriminatório. O Yamamoto fala que o anime morreu. Meu Deus, é muita coisa. Nossa, ele começou a brigar com o cast do anime. Com as personagens. Essa trecha eu não consigo nem entender. Nossa, esse cara é muito louco, cara. Nossa. Ele ficou total esquizo. Ele começou a falar, não, a idol lá foi esfaqueada por um funk triste, mas tem um ponto. Porque o cara tem ponto de ficar triste que não recebeu resposta. Ele tá querendo cometer churrascada. Ninguém quer investir no anime dele de Dark Fantasy. Garota má. Ele pelo visto faliu. Aí ele culpa os otakus e a China pelo cancelamento do anime dele de New Life Plus. E aí ele falou que ele odeia chinês.
But yeah, to get this wrapped
Ele
up,
foi proibido de entrar na
that is
China.
Fractale. That is the unforgettable story of the peculiar battles of an otherwise extremely forgettable anime. I can't really think of anything else to say about all this.
Maluquice.
So, God, I don't know. If you haven't already watched it, then you should go watch Madoka.
Brabo. Que loucura, mano. Que cara louco. Cara louco, mano. Cara louco, viado. Esse cara é muito louco, cara. Que vídeo foi esse, velho?